So, hi everyone, this is the PR Whisperer, and on this page I offer commentary from the lenses of PR and faith. So, I want to talk today about the National Association of Black Journalists annual convention and Trump's remarks at that event. Now, the National Association of Black Journalists, or NABJ, is experiencing a crisis of sorts, one that I've not seen in my more than 8 years as a member of the organization. So the crisis kicked off when NABJ leadership announced that former President Donald Trump was speaking at the annual convention. Now, having gone to NABJ for years, I can say that I've always treasured the space because the NABJ convention feels like a safe space and one of the rare safe spaces for journalists, but also media professionals, Black media professionals. I never felt a need to be on guard for disinformation or hostility towards Black professionals. And at the same time, I've always considered NABJ to be somewhat of a blend between an advocacy organization as well as a journalism outfit. Now, I've reflected on the controversy surrounding Trump's visit to NABJ, and I'm walking away with a couple things that I think could have averted a crisis and a couple things that could have helped the leadership of NABJ to manage this a little bit better. So the first point is that the decision to invite President Trump to speak on a panel or to be interviewed by a panel of journalists at NABJ was not thoroughly vetted, and the vetting process did not offer enough time. Now, the debate around whether the former president should speak, it was announced and it was heavily publicized just a couple days before it actually happened. So I think that if you're going to invite someone like former President Donald Trump to the NABJ convention, that is a decision that needed to have been vetted sometime in advance to allow all parties to comment and to discuss it and also to hear feedback. I don't think that that is something that you just drop on Black journalists and expect them to just continue to carry on with it. The other thing that I noticed about this that certainly contributed to the crisis or the perception of chaos was that NABJ's own internal standards were not followed. Now, typically, a person cannot even register for the convention unless they are a member of NABJ. And even when you attempt to register for a convention, you first have to update your membership if it is expired or get a membership if you don't have one. So it's therefore pretty surprising to me that Harris Faulkner from Fox News was able to be one of the journalists who interviewed Donald Trump, given that she is not a member of NABJ, and that came out after the fact. So that just goes to show that NABJ did not follow its own processes and protocols with regards to Harris Faulkner joining the organization. When I think about NABJ, I feel like NABJ is in this tricky position of being an advocacy organization, which many Black media outlets are, as well as a journalism organization. And as an advocacy organization, a lot of people consider NABJ as an advocacy organization. I tend to think that Black media and even Latino or Hispanic media, they tend to be on the advocacy end. And that's because, if you have this experience of being a Black person, you are very familiar with the various struggles, the various trials and triumphs that Black communities face. And so even as a journalism outlet, you are working to inform, but you're also working to advocate and mitigate some of these challenges. And so if you look at the way that the average Black media outlet might cover an issue, and I'm not talking about entertainment media because entertainment media is there solely to entertain, but I'm talking about Black publications that are news oriented or news outlets. And if you look at how they cover a story, it's typically on an advocacy bent. And so I feel like NABJ is in this interesting space of being both an advocacy organization as well as a journalism organization. And so there were some people who feel like, if I'm looking at you as an advocacy organization, you should not have someone on the panel who a lot of people feel has been problematic to Black communities. Not all people feel like that, but some people feel like that. However, if you're a journalism organization, then you would sit down with every presidential candidate. So I feel like that's a tricky spot, and perhaps there should be more dialogue within NABJ, possibly at one of their regional events or their annual convention, to talk about who we are, who we want to be, and how we approach these kinds of things. I think that the other thing that created a crisis with regards to President Trump speaking at NABJ was how the journalists who interviewed him, how they were selected. I don't know if there was a vetting process. I know that there are a lot of journalists who have been members of NABJ far longer than certainly me, although I'm not a journalist, but I'm on the media side. But they've been members of NABJ for years. I mean, years and years and years. And if veteran journalists, some of whom received awards from NABJ hosts an awards ceremony every year as part of their convention, and if they were not given an opportunity to, one, be informed that he was coming, to discuss who would interview him, I feel like a lot of people may see that or may have seen that as a slap in the face. So how the three journalists were selected, Kadia Goba, Rachel Scott from ABC, and then also Harris Faulkner from Fox, the selection of how those three journalists came to be, I know it rubbed some people the wrong way, and that also contributed to the crisis. The other thing about Trump is, President Trump has this history of verbally attacking Black journalists. And Black journalists such as April Ryan, Abby Phillip, Yamiche Alcindor, Nicole Hannah-Jones, and others have been roundly and routinely criticized by President Trump, as well as his allies. The attacks on some of these journalists, Black journalists, as well as female journalists, non-Black female journalists, I should say, the attacks were so severe that the former president of NABJ, Sarah Glover, actually issued a statement. The organization actually issued a statement about it. And so, let's look at some of what has been said, or what President Trump has said about some of these journalists. He called April Ryan, a veteran, highly acclaimed journalist who is a White House correspondent, has been a White House correspondent for years. But he called her a loser, and he threatened to revoke her press credentials. About Nicole Hannah-Jones, I mean, she is, again, another decorated journalist who has been working for decades, even before her 1619 project that she did while at the New York Times. And I believe she's still there. I think she may be at New York Magazine. But even before that, the 1619 project came out. Nicole Hannah-Jones has been in the field of journalism doing remarkable work for years. She's someone who I have pitched, having been on the PR side. But about the 1619 project, he said the left has warped, distorted, defiled the American story with deceptions, falsehoods, and lies. There is no better example than the New York Times totally discredited 1619 project. And what I want to note is that when President Trump goes after a person or a journalist, it's not just him. As soon as he says it, there are a host of people who will swarm that person. And so they experience online harassment. Some journalists have even reported, having death threats. I have a very good friend, and she's a journalist who lives between Washington, D.C. and North Carolina, and she covers politics. And she is someone, again, she's been a journalist for decades, but she told me that in the time leading up to the 2020 election, so from 2016 to 2020 and even up into this present time, the hostility in politics has had a direct impact on her. She told me that she went to her gym and someone called her, they threatened her at the gym. So, it's not just when President Trump says something, but when he says something, his followers can also be quite hostile, and some of these journalists know that. Now, I mentioned Nicole Hannah-Jones, and I said that she was highly decorated. Her 1619 project received a Pulitzer Prize, and I think that was in 2020. And of course, 1619 comes from the year that the first Africans arrived in slave ships in the United States. So President Trump has this long history of attacking people with whom he disagrees, including Black journalists. And Black journalists have gotten their fair share of his disdain, his taunts, his verbal lashings. And so based on that premise alone, there are some people who would say there's no way that he ever should have been invited to speak before Black journalists, not to mention some of the things that he has said about the Black community. So that also led to the crisis. So all these things, if you add them up together, you could understand why there was so much resentment, so much anger. And I don't think that, while this story may have faded from the headlines, I believe that Ken Lemon, who is the current president of NABJ, this does not bode well for him. He came in, or he was elected last year, or he came in as the president last year. I believe his term started in 2023. But this kind of crisis, it doesn't bode well for him. And I certainly hope that that NABJ is thinking about how they convene, maybe they already have, how they convene a space with journalists to talk through this and to figure out what the next steps are and how, how the organization is going to handle this type of thing going forward. I will say that I typically go to NABJ every year. There were a couple years when I had my daughter, right after I had my daughter, that I did not go, but I typically go every year. Last year, I even sponsored a reception at NABJ, and I was totally surprised. I did not go this year, but not because of this. I just, with my personal travel, my business travel, I just could not make it this year. But I was totally surprised by everything that's happened, and also wishing the organization well, because at the end of the day, the organization still stands for supporting journalists and creating a safe space for journalists. And so I hope that it can work through these challenges and come out stronger on the other side. If you like this content, please be sure to subscribe and share, and you can also leave a positive comment. Thank you so much for listening and for watching.